Mr. President, every single year we are losing about $100 billion in tax revenue because corporations and wealthy individuals are stashing their money in tax havens in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and elsewhere. These quote-unquote patriotic Americans who love this country so much are stashing their money abroad in order to avoid paying taxes in this country. And maybe before you cut education, maybe before you cut back on infrastructure, maybe we make sure that we do away with these tax havens and these tax shelters for millionaires and billionaires and large corporations. Lastly, Mr. President, we have tripled military spending since 1997. And right now, the United States is spending almost as much as the rest of the world combined. We spend over 4% of our GDP on the military. Our friends in Europe, many of the countries there provide health care to all of their people, educational opportunities stronger than we do to their people. They are spending 2%. We're spending twice as much in GDP on defense. And maybe it is time to take a hard look at a lot of the waste and inefficiencies that currently exist in the Defense Department. Mr. President, on my website, sanders.senate.gov, we have a whole list of ways that we can bring in revenue where we can make cuts which are fair, which protect the middle class and working families and the most vulnerable people in this country. But I am going to do everything that I can, Mr. President, to make sure that we do not go forward in terms of deficit reduction by punishing people who are already hurting and then giving more tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. That is bad economic policy, that is immoral, and it's not something that we should be doing. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
As we wait for further debate in the Senate, lawmakers earlier today voted to move forward with work on the Veterans Jobs Bill, providing training and veterans preference in certain federal jobs. The vote on that was 95-1. While we wait for more from the Senate, remarks now from the majority and minority leaders on the Senate agenda and the 9/11 attacks.
Just a short ways from this chamber, S-209, I'm sorry. We've been meeting for many, many years as a Senate Democratic leadership to discuss the issues of the week. We just finished a meeting there, and part of the discussion today in that meeting was what happened 11 years ago, exact same time as we were meeting there. I can remember that so clearly. I will never, never forget that. It's implanted in my mind so clearly. I was the first one to get to that meeting, and Senator Breaux from Louisiana came in, and he said, "There's something going on in New York. Let's turn on the TV," and we did. Senators started coming in, and it appeared that an airplane had hit one of the towers, and we were wondering why it would have done that. Something obviously was wrong. And so the meeting, Senator Daschle was the leader, and he started the meeting. And the TV was off. And the meeting was just getting started, and someone came in to take Senator Daschle out of that meeting, and he came back very quickly, and he said, "There's a plane headed for the Capitol, and we all have to vacate the Capitol, everybody." And so the alarm went out, and people were rushing down these halls, leaving. I can remember leaving that room over here, looking out the window and seeing the smoke billowing from what we learn now is the Pentagon. It was on fire. The plane had hit that. There was still one plane in the air, and that was headed for the Capitol. Even though, as I've indicated, that was 11 years ago, I remember the sight as if it were yesterday. We have many meetings in that room, and I often think of what transpired that morning as I looked out toward the Pentagon. So Mr. President, over the last decade, our country has begun to heal from the wounds of that terrible, terrible attack. It was attacked by terrorists. The scars remain. Scars are deeper with some than others. But no matter how many years pass, we'll never forget the thousands of innocent people who died in New York, Pennsylvania, and across the river here in Virginia. There were mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, spouses and friends. All they were doing is their jobs, and others were just catching a plane to go visit loved ones, business trips. So it's good that we pause each year to pay tribute and to remember. That will occur here on the Senate floor, as I announced, at 11 a.m. today, and there'll be a ceremony out front of the Capitol at the same time. The memories of that dark day in our shared history are very painful, but they give me hope as well. They give me hope because on September 11th, during the difficult months that followed, Americans showed the world how a unified nation can fight back against darkness and fear. Democrats weren't alone fighting back. Republicans weren't alone fighting back. We were all fighting back together in the face of great evil, and that's what it was. There were so many that rushed forward to show great courage, enormous dignity, and kindness. So today we also pause to remember the firefighters who rushed into the World Trade Center knowing they might never come out. And they didn't come out, a lot of them. We pause to remember the police officers and rescue workers who hurried to the scene, combed through the debris, and shepherded New Yorkers to safety. Some of them gave their lives that day. We pause to remember the bravery of the members of our nation's armed forces, our intelligence community, and foreign service, as well as the sacrifice of their families. They've borne the burdens of war for more than a decade. They've given their blood, their sweat, and too often their lives to the effort to crush al-Qaeda, bring Osama bin Laden to justice, and keep America safe. And we pause to remember the unbreakable spirit of those valiant people, and certainly the United States of America.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader.
in the course of a lifetime, one always remembers those moments of national grief and anxiety. They don't happen very often. For my parents' generation, it was, where were you when you heard about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor? When I was a young man, and my friend the Majority Leader was a young man, it was, where were you when you heard about the assassination of President Kennedy? For the current generation, it was, of course, where were you when you heard about 9/11? As the Majority Leader has indicated, it was for us here at the Capitol, kind of close up and personal, if you will. I recall being late that morning, and as a result of not having yet gotten to work, I saw, as millions of Americans did, the second plane go into the second building in real time. As the Majority Leader has indicated, the building was subsequently evacuated, people scattered around town. And at the end of this horrendous and frightening day, we all gathered on the steps of the Capitol to sing God Bless America. It was one of the most uplifting and unifying moments in the history of our country. And I think it's safe to say that we are, as a nation, together, even though we have our political differences, together and stronger in the wake of what happened. In what is now a time-honored tradition, later this morning we'll gather on the Capitol steps to mark the solemn anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. It's fitting that we remember the thousands of innocent men and women who died that morning 11 years ago, and that despite our political differences, we remember the unity and resolve we all felt that day. In the days and weeks that followed these horrific attacks on our homeland, we were united by a common grief and outrage. Some wondered what the future would bring. But 11 years later, I think I can say that America is stronger than it was on 9/11. So today, we honor the sacrifice of those who died that day and the millions who have stepped forward to defend the nation in the armed forces and intelligence services in the years since, especially those who have given their lives in that service. On 9/11, we showed the world that America does not shrink from a challenge. And every day since, courageous men and women have humbled us through their courage and sacrifice on our behalf. Today is a day to show them our deep gratitude and renew our commitment to live lives worthy of their sacrifice.
say aye.
The senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum calling process be initiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I think several of us have talked about the tragic terrorist attack on America 11 years ago today. And I think we all remember where we were at the time, what we did at the time. I remember so well going up to New York, to Ground Zero, and seeing the people that were involved, talking to the families of some of the firemen who lost their lives. And as tragic as that is, I just wonder, I have to ask the question, is there any doubt after 9/11 took place 11 years ago today, that those terrorists, if they had the ability to send a weapon over to the United States, would hesitate to do that? You know, I look back sometimes wistfully at the days of the Cold War, back when it was USSR and the United States. They were predictable, we were predictable. But, you know, it's different now. Such concepts as mutual assured destruction at that time was somewhat meaningful and was very effective. It's not effective now because you're dealing with people who want to die. It's a different environment altogether. And I have to say that on this 11th year, on this particular day, that when I think back about President Obama's first budget, and that would have been 4 years ago, in that budget he did a lot of things I thought were very destructive to our military, and I've talked about that on the floor several times. He did away with the only fifth-generation vehicle, the F-22. He did away with our lift capacity of the C-17, did away with the Future Combat System. But there's one thing, I think people are aware of that, but the one thing that a lot of people are not aware of that happened in that same budget was doing away with the Poland site of a ground-based interceptor. Now, a lot of people don't remember this because this is 4 years ago. But if you think back at the decision that was made in this country, that we had to prepare ourselves for Iran having the capability of a weapon that could be sent all the way over to the United States. And that while I'm very confident, I have to say this, anything coming from the west, we have ground-based interceptors in Alaska all the way down to Southern California. Anything coming from that way, I feel very comfortable. But coming from the other direction, coming from Iran, that's not the case. And so we recognized some 6 or 7 years ago that we're going to have to have some kind of a ground-based interceptor that would take care of a missile coming from the east. And so we did that. And that's when I was part of the negotiation, I'd say, to my good friend in the presiding seat, in both the Czech Republic and in Poland. In the Czech Republic, they had to be willing to have a radar site up there, and in Poland, they had to be willing to take on Russia, who didn't want them to have this capability, and put a ground-based interceptor in Poland to take care of anything coming from that direction. Well, we did that. But in this budget, that was the first budget of President Obama, he did away with that. Now, they tried to say that maybe that was not an accurate assessment, but the 2007 NIE, National Intelligence Estimate, concluded that Iran could develop an intercontinental missile capability by 2015. And less than a year later, DOD stated in its April of 2010 report on Iran's military they sent to Congress, and I remember this very well, and I'm quoting now from that, they said Iran, with sufficient foreign assistance, Iran could probably develop and test an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, capable of reaching the United States by 2015. Totally consistent with what they said back in 2007. And in place of the third site, the Obama administration pitched a new missile defense plan, the European phased adaptive approach with incremental development of sea and air and land versions and so forth. Now, I think one thing we all agree on and that is that the SM-3 Block 1B is something that is a short to medium range defense mechanism. The SM-3 Block 2A is also short and medium, but the one that would take the place and have the capability of the ground-based interceptor in Poland would be the SM-3 Block 2B. Now, that's still a concept. It's on the drawing board. Now, here we know that Iran is going to have that capability by 2015, and they're saying maybe a deployment date by 2020, which leaves the United States of America and Europe unprotected for 5 years. Now, you say I say unprotected. Yeah, there is some level of protection there. They talk about the Aegis ships. However, in subsequent budgets, the President has cut the number of Aegis ships and their capability and the number of missiles that they carry, and to the point where it leaves us still, I think, unprotected. Not just us, but also Europe. Now, fast forward to today, in DOD's April 2012 report, that's just a few months ago, the report on Iran, which again states, and I'm quoting from that report now, quote, Iran has boosted the lethality and effectiveness of existing systems with accuracy improvements and new submission payloads. Iran may be technically capable of flight testing an intercontinental ballistic missile by what year? Same year, 2015. Secretary Panetta confirmed this on he's the Secretary of Defense. On 60 Minutes, he said earlier this year that he believes Iran would be able to produce a nuclear weapon in about a year, and then it would take them another 1 to 2 years in order to put it on a deliverable vehicle. That's, again, around 2015, leaving a 5-year gap between the date when our interceptors become operational and the date that Iran fields a nuclear ballistic missile capable of threatening Europe and the United States. In this year's budget request, President Obama cut $250 million from the THAAD system and procuring 36 interceptors instead of 42. He cuts the THAAD fire units from 9 to 6, cuts $175 million in Aegis, and again, that's part of the system that would take place to replace the ground-based interceptor in Poland that was already under construction. The SM-3 procurement would be delayed, and procuring 29 SM-3 Block 1B interceptors instead of 46. In other words, cutting down dramatically our capability at the same time that there can be no doubt in anyone's mind from what I've just said that 2015 is a realistic date when Iran would have the capability of not just the weapon but a delivery system. Additionally, the President has failed to plan or program enough Aegis ships in the budget to provide full coverage. In other words, you can move them around. They have a good rocket capability. I've been very supportive of the Aegis system. But he's cutting down the number of those. And those would really be there just for the protection of Europe and not the protection of the United States. At the end of President Obama's now infamous meeting with Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, we remember that very well. That was on the 26th of March of this year. President Obama said, and I'm quoting now, not knowing, I guess, that the mic was open, he said, on all these issues, but particularly missile defense, this can be solved, but it's important for him, and he's talking about the incoming President Vladimir Putin, to give me space. That's his words, President Obama. Give me space. This is my last election. After my election, I'll have more flexibility. Well, I'd have to say that thinking now back 11 years ago today, the tragedy, the 3,000 people that were immediately were killed in that horrible terrorist attack. Again, I asked the same question that I asked a few minutes ago. Is there any doubt in anyone's mind that a person who would do this, a terrorist that would come over on a well-orchestrated attack, terrorist attack on America, would they hesitate using a system delivered on some type of a vehicle to the eastern part of the United States? And I say no. I can't imagine that anyone believes that is not a possibility. And as tragic as 3,000 people being killed was, It doesn't take much of an imagination to look at any type of a missile hitting a major American city. You wouldn't be talking about 3,000, you'd be talking about 300,000 or even 3 million. So I think this is a day on the 11th anniversary that we need to take the warning that we received 11 years ago and look in the future, not just for ourselves, in my case for my 20 kids and grandkids, but we cannot subject ourselves, and we need to, as quickly as possible, take care of this horrible gap that we have in our defense from an incoming missile coming from the east. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Madam President.
The senator from Wyoming.
I'd ask that further proceedings under the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you. Since this is a day of remembrance of 9/11,